Hey everyone, let's take a look at how we can create navigation using Flexbox. We're going to get more into this as we get into more responsive stuff like media queries later on, and we're going to use something like this, but I'm going to show you how to set something up that's responsive ready. In the past, we've done horizontal and vertical navigation using nav, UL, and LI with links inside of the LIs. We use display inline or display block or display inline block to have things either vertically stacked or horizontally stacked. Now we have Flexbox. And as you've seen, Flexbox allows us to justify content and allows us to move things around vertically or horizontally. So let's take a look at using flex direction row and justify content to create our horizontal navigation and decide where it's going to go within the page. Okay. I have a web page right now that looks like this. I've already got it designed. I'm going to show you the markup, and I'm going to show you the CSS for this. The markup is mostly from a previous video. If you watched the video where we made the flexed content box that had the H2, the fig caption, and a couple of paragraphs next to one another, this is the same markup. I haven't changed anything. So if you haven't watched that video, I recommend you go back to that video and look at it because I go over the markup a little more in detail. I'm just going to give it a quick skim right now. Let's look at the HTML first. We start out with our standard HTML skeleton with the doc type declaration of HTML. We've got our HTML root element. We've got our head and the usual things like the meta char set, the viewport, which we've been doing in these responsive videos, the title, and then a link to our style sheet. My style sheet is called Flex Demo Style CSS, and it's over here. In my body, I've got a div called wrapper. The wrapper is wrapping up all of my content. That allows me to have all of that content contained in this box where I can set the width of that wrapper wider and narrower to constrain how I want that to look. We've been doing this wrapper thing for quite a while now, basically since the very beginning of your HTML journey with me, if you've watched my series all along. In there, I've got my header with an H1, as usual. I've got my nav with a UL and a series of LIs, each of the LIs containing its own link, as usual. And then I've got a main element, you saw this in the previous video, with a div called image container. And that image container was that flexed box right here that contains the figure and fig caption and the two paragraphs sitting side by side, and I set the width to 50%. So div class image container opens, and then it closes way down here. We'll take a look at what's inside there really quickly. At the top of the image container, I had my H2 because I wanted that H2 spanning the entire width of that image container. I've got a div called class flex row container, and that's going to contain the figure and fig caption and the two paragraphs to the right side of it. Directly as a child of the flex row container is my figure. Figure has an image of Mr. Sinister and a fig caption that just says caption. Figure closes. And then below the figure, which is going to show up to the right side when I'm flexing it, I've got a div called class text container. And that text container just contains two paragraphs. One paragraph, two paragraphs. So I'm just going to minimize some of these things so you can see what the markup really looks like. I'm minimizing my two paragraphs. You can see that there is the div image container. It's inside the main. My H2 with subhead. My div class flex row container, which contains my figure, my image, my fig caption. My div class text container, which has two paragraphs, and those are just minimized right now. Those both close, those two divs both close, and then my main closes, and then I've got a footer with a paragraph in it. That's the basic markup that you need for this. Okay, we're talking about nav in this one. And what I want to do is I want to have this set up so that it's able to respond to the size of the screen later on once we get to the media queries and stuff. I'm not going to show you those in this video, but this will be ready for media queries at another point. I'm going to set it up right now so that the links are all the way to the right side. They're justified to the right, or to the flex end, if you will. And then I'm going to show you how to have them set in the center so that on a smaller screen, they'll be centered. And then when we get down to a very small screen, I'm going to have them as a vertical stack. Sometimes with responsive navigation, you see the navigation entirely collapse down to what's called a hamburger menu. You know, that little button icon with the 3 lines, that's called a hamburger menu. You click on that button, it expands the navigation. We're not going to talk about that in this video, and not really in this video series at all. If you wanted to learn something like that, you can do some further learning. It's going to require some JavaScript and things. But in this video, we're just going to talk a little bit about how we can use Flex to make navigation look good. So if we look at my navigation right now, you can see that it is off to the right side. There's a little bit of space in between each list item, and each list item has a little bit of padding around the content, and it's shoved all the way to the right side. Let's look at the styles that do that. So this is regarding my nav, UL, LI structure. I'm going to go over to my CSS, Flex Demo Style CSS, and I'm going to go all the way to the top because that's where I've got my styles. My wrapper is a width of 80%. It's got a background color of sky blue, and the margin is auto. That's just setting up the wrapper so that the web page sits in the middle of my page. So all my content sits in the middle of my page. Navigation UL. So nav UL. The UL is going to be the container box for all of the navigation items. So given that it's a container, and the things that I want to have sit by side are the list items, this is going to be the container that gets flexed because the list items are the children. Let's look at the HTML really quickly. So nav is containing my UL. If I put flex on nav, it wouldn't do anything to these list items. What it would do is it would take this one child and it would flex it. When we think about flex, we're always thinking about what is the parent and what is the child. In this case, the parent that I want to display flex on is the one that's containing all of my list items, because the list items are the things that I want to have sit side by side. And those are the things that I want to actually flex. So UL contains all of my LIs. So UL is the parent, LI are the children, or UL is the flexed item, and LI are all the children that will be moved around by that display flex. So nav UL, we're setting that to display flex. Justify content is set to flex end. Now flex end moves it all the way to the right. If I take this out of here, I'm just going to take this out so you can see what the default is. The default is flex start, which is the left side. Left side is flex start. Right side is flex end. I did justify content center. It's going to center all of those items. But that's not what I want. I want to start with flex end. Okay, so that's going to set it up so that all of my links are to the right side. This is pretty common for navigation on web pages, to have the navigation start on the right side. Let's take a look at how I've styled the nav UL LIs. So remember, these LIs are the children. I wanted those LIs to have a little bit of padding, a little bit of space to the left and right of them, and I wanted them to have a different background color from their container. So if the nav UL, which is my navigation container, that thing that's flexed, had a light slate gray background, I gave the background of the LIs linen, and that made it so that these are a lighter color. It's not quite white. You can see it's a little bit off-white, but it's lighter than the UL. So nav UL is that dark slate gray. Linen is those LIs. I set the box sizing to border box so that the width of the border is contained within the width of the box. It doesn't add to the width of the box. I set the padding to 0.5 on top and bottom and 1 on left and right. So it gives us a little less space on the top and bottom than we have on the left and right. You can set the padding to taste. I usually like to have a little wider padding on the left and right than on the top and bottom for something like navigation. I set the margin only on the left to 1% because I wanted to have these gaps in between it, but I didn't want to have a gap on the right side. And then I've got the, I already said, the background color set to linen. Okay, let's see what happens as this gets smaller. At its widest, you can see the navigation is sitting to the right. I move it over, it stays at the right. What I want to have it do is when it gets to about this size here, I would have it respond to have these things sit all the way across with a little bit of space in between, kind of maybe when I get around here. And in order to do that with justify content, I need to think about the spacing around and in between the items. We've looked at justify content before. We've done flex end, we did flex start, we did center, but we also have something like space around. I'm going to save that and take a look at it. When I do space around, it puts an even amount of space on the left and right side of all of these elements. Well, when I've got my web page at the maximum size, this looks awkward. Those links are too far away from one another. They don't have proximity with one another, so they don't make a visual connection, and they don't feel like they are part of the same thing. But if my web page was smaller, it looks right when it's kind of around this size here. The space around looks pretty darn good. Okay, but when I start to crunch down too small, then things start to look bad. So instead of doing space around in this type of situation, when the page gets really small, I would probably do something like take this justify content out and do flex direction, column. So you can see that it doesn't look great when it's on a wide screen like this. But if my screen were really narrow, that looks more appropriate. Okay? So flex allows us to have several different ways of arranging that content for navigation. Like I said, when I have a wide screen, so the default display on this, I'm going to probably say that I would want justify content to be flex end. So it looks like that. And then I could have other style sheets for different size breakpoints and have that respond. And we'll see that in a future video. Thanks for watching.